Since you have just lost your job, you'll be moving in with my son. He'll take care of you now. The ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton went silent. Then someone laughed. Then everyone laughed. Phones came out. My mother-in-law smiled in navy sequins under the chandelier lights, nodding along like this announcement was planned instead of the ambush it actually was. I looked at my husband. Ethan stared at the floor. His cheeks flushed pink. He said nothing. Not, "Mom, we'll talk later." Not, "That's not the plan." Nothing. That was the moment I stopped being a bride and started being done. Before we continue, kindly comment the city where you are watching from and make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story like this. Now let's continue. Charlotte, North Carolina, in June feels like standing inside someone's mouth. The humidity wraps around you and doesn't let go. But inside the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, the air conditioning hummed like a promise. White roses climbed the walls, $18,000 worth. I'd paid for every petal. The DJ was playing something upbeat when my mother-in-law approached his booth. I was talking to my college roommate near the dessert table. Lemon cake, raspberry filling, 3 tiers of hope. My mother-in-law whispered something to the DJ, and he handed her the microphone like it was a cute surprise, like she was about to toast the happy couple. She stood under the chandelier in a navy sequined gown that caught the light with every breath. For a second, I thought maybe she'd say something nice, something about love or family or the future. Then she opened her mouth. "Since you have just lost your job, you'll be moving in with my son. He'll take care of you now." The ballroom went completely still. You could hear the ice melting in someone's drink. Then a woman near the back giggled. Nervous at first, then louder. Then everyone joined in. Phones came out. Someone actually shouted, "Ah, family forever!" Like my mother-in-law had just announced a pregnancy instead of staging a hostile takeover of my marriage. I scanned the room for Ethan. My husband of exactly 3 hours stood near the bar with his groomsmen. His face had gone pale except for 2 pink spots high on his cheeks. He stared at his shoes like they held the answer to a question he refused to ask. I waited. I waited for him to walk over to his mother and gently take the microphone. To say, "We'll talk about this later, Mom." To protect the boundary we'd never actually set but that I'd assumed existed. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He lifted his beer to his mouth and took a long, slow drink. The laughter in the room started to feel like static in my ears. Tinny. Far away. I smiled. I've always been good at smiling when I'm breaking. I kissed my roommate on the cheek and told her I needed air. Then I walked out of the ballroom in my $9,000 gown with my train dragging behind me like a white flag I refused to wave. The hallway. Outside was quieter, cooler. I could hear the muffled bass of the music and the distant clatter of dishes being cleared. My hands were shaking when I pulled my phone from the small beaded purse my maid of honor had carried down the aisle. I scrolled to a name I'd hoped I wouldn't need tonight. Mark picked up on the first ring. "It happened," I whispered. There was a pause. Not shock. Recognition. "Good," he said. "We can start phase 2. The bridal dressing room smelled like hairspray and roses. I locked the door behind me and threw my bouquet onto the velvet couch. Peonies and garden roses, $75 a stem. I'd chosen them because they reminded me of my grandmother's garden. Now they just looked expensive and temporary. I sat in front of the vanity mirror and stared at my reflection. My veil had gone crooked. Mascara pooled under my left eye. I looked like someone who'd just survived something instead of celebrated it. Mark's voice on speakerphone was calm, professional. He'd been my attorney for 2 years. Back in Atlanta, his office overlooked Midtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and framed degrees that made you feel like someone was finally on your side. "Walk me through exactly what she said," he instructed. I repeated my mother-in-law's announcement word for word. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, I heard him typing. "And Ethan's response?" he asked. "Nothing." He said nothing. More typing. Then a long exhale. Olivia, you know what this means. The clause in the prenup activates the moment a third adult attempts to establish residency in the marital home without your written consent. She announced her intention publicly. That's step one. I stared at the documents I'd signed 6 months ago. In my mind, I could see the red folder on Mark's desk, the one labeled Phase 2 in his neat handwriting. At the time, I'd thought I was being paranoid. Now I understood I'd been preparing. What happens next? I asked, even though I already knew. You set the boundary. If he violates it, the prenup is enforceable. He loses claim to the house and to any equity stake in your company. No spousal support. Clean exit. I looked at myself in the mirror. My wedding dress suddenly felt like armor instead of decoration. Somewhere down the hall, guests were probably still laughing, still taking photos, still thinking this was all just a funny family moment they'd share at brunch tomorrow. But I knew something they didn't. I'd built an escape hatch 6 months ago because part of me had always known this day would come. You don't grow up watching toxic family stories without learning to spot the patterns. And Ethan's pattern was clear. He'd choose his mother's feelings over mine every single time. Mark's voice softened. You don't have to decide anything tonight, but the clock starts now. Document everything. Save the videos people posted. Get witness statements if you can. I already know what I'm going to do, I said. He didn't ask. He just said, call me in the morning, and hung up. I sat there for another 10 minutes, alone, in a room that smelled like wilting flowers and crushed expectations. When I finally stood up, I smoothed my dress and fixed my veil. Then I walked back to my wedding reception with my head high and my future in my own hands. I'd never told Ethan what Phase 2 really meant for him, and tonight he'd triggered it without even knowing. 6 months earlier, Ethan and I stood in front of a craftsman-style house in South Park. The neighborhood was all tree-lined streets and families walking golden retrievers, the kind of place where people waved from porches and kids rode bikes without helmets, because everyone knew everyone. The house had a blue door, 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places. I imagined my home office in the front room with light pouring through the bay windows. Maybe a kid's room upstairs one day. A nursery, painted, soft yellow. It's perfect, Ethan said, squeezing my hand. The realtor smiled. She wore a blazer and too much perfume. Great school district, low crime. Most houses here don't even stay on the market 2 weeks. I loved it immediately. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was meeting Ethan's mother at his older sister's house 3 days later. She lived in a spare room barely big enough for a twin bed and a dresser. Cardboard boxes lined the walls. The air smelled stale, like the windows hadn't been opened in months. His mother sat on the edge of the bed, folding laundry. Daytime television played in the background. Some courtroom show where people screamed about unpaid rent. She looked up when we walked in and smiled. You must be Olivia, she said. Ethan's told me so much about you. We made small talk. She asked about my job. I explained that I was a software engineer working on a health tech app. We'd just secured our first round of investors. She nodded like she understood, but her eyes had already glazed over. That's nice, honey. I never could wrap my head around computers. Then she said it. So casual, so certain. After you two get married, I'm finally getting a real bedroom again. She laughed. Ethan laughed. I didn't laugh. I looked at him, waiting for him to correct the assumption. To say, actually, Mom, Olivia and I haven't talked about anyone moving in. He just shrugged and changed the subject to wedding venues. On the drive home, I brought it up, carefully, the way you'd approach a sleeping dog. Does your mom really think she's moving in with us? Ethan sighed. She's just being dramatic. You know how moms are. But I didn't know. My mother lived in Oregon with her second husband and a Labrador named Biscuit. She visited twice a year and called every Sunday. She didn't assume she had a room in my future home. Ethan, we need to be clear about boundaries. We will, I promise. Just not tonight, okay? I'm exhausted. That was how he operated. Delay, deflect, avoid. I started to recognize the pattern. Every time his mother hinted about moving in, he'd brush it off. Every time I tried to address it, he'd ask if we could talk about it later. Later never came. I spent that night scrolling articles about AITA toxic parents and in-law boundaries. Reddit threads. Advice columns. They all said the same thing. If your partner won't set boundaries with their family, they're choosing their family over you. And that choice only gets worse after marriage. I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling of my apartment. Then I made a decision. If Ethan couldn't protect our future, I would. The next morning, I called Mark. The Cheesecake Factory in Atlanta was loud. Families crowded into booths. Waiters carried trays, stacked with oversized plates. The menu had 100 pages, and every dish sounded the same. Ethan loved it. I tolerated it. We were there the night before ring shopping. His mother, his sister, his brother-in-law, and us. A family dinner to celebrate our engagement. I wore a blue dress I'd bought specifically for this occasion. Ethan wore the shirt I'd ironed that morning. We ordered appetizers, fried mac and cheese, avocado egg rolls. Things that came with 4 different dipping sauces. The conversation was light at first. Wedding colors, venue options, whether we'd do a church ceremony or something outdoors. Then his mother cleared her throat. She'd ordered a strawberry lemonade that came in a glass the size of a fishbowl. She stirred it with her straw and smiled. "I'm just so excited," she said. "Once you two are married, I'll finally have somewhere proper to stay." The table went quiet. Ethan's sister looked down at her plate. His brother-in-law suddenly became very interested in his phone. I felt my stomach drop. "We haven't talked about anyone moving in," I said, gently, calmly. The way you'd correct someone who'd gotten your coffee order wrong. His mother laughed. "Oh, honey, I'm not anyone. I'm family." "I know. I just mean that Ethan and I need to discuss it first before we make any decisions." The word decisions hung in the air like smoke. His mother's smile tightened. Ethan shifted in his seat. No one looked at me. "Mom's been staying with us for 2 years," his sister finally said. "It's time for her to have her own space." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to ask why my house was suddenly the solution to a problem no one had asked me to solve. Instead, I looked at Ethan, my fiancé, the man who was supposed to be on my team. "We'll figure it out," he said quickly. Then he changed the subject. "So, Mom, did you see the venue photos Olivia sent?" Just like that, dismissed, deflected, erased. I sat there for the rest of dinner with a smile painted on my face. I ate my pasta. I laughed at the right moments. I pretended everything was fine, but inside, something shifted. A door I didn't even know existed slammed shut. In the car on the way home, I tried again. "Ethan, I need to know I'm not marrying a package deal." He stared straight ahead at the highway. I-85 stretched out in front of us. Red taillights blurred together. "Can we not fight about this tonight?" "I'm not fighting. I'm asking. And I said we'll figure it out. Why do you always have to push?" That was his favorite deflection. Make it about me. About my need for clarity. About my inability to just go with the flow and trust that everything would work out. I didn't say anything else. I turned toward the window and watched Atlanta disappear behind us. When we got back to my apartment, Ethan kissed me goodnight and said he loved me. I said it back, but the words tasted different, hollow. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and Googling prenuptial agreements and protecting assets in marriage. At 2 a.m, I found Mark's law firm website. I sent an inquiry form. By 9 the next morning, his assistant called to schedule a consultation. Would you have done the same? When does protecting yourself become a revenge story? Mark's office in Midtown Atlanta felt like a sanctuary. Glass walls, leather chairs, a view that stretched across the city skyline. Jazz played softly from hidden speakers. Everything about the space said, "You're safe here. We've got you." He was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, sharp suit, kind eyes. He didn't rush me when I sat down. He just slid a box of tissues across his desk and waited. I told him everything. About the house, about Ethan's mother, about the dinners where I was outvoted and the conversations where I was dismissed. About how much I loved Ethan, but how terrified I was of losing myself in a marriage where his family's needs would always come first. Mark listened. He took notes. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Rain tapped against the window behind him. "Let me ask you something," he said. "Do you think Ethan will choose you?" The question hit me like cold water. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe that when it really mattered, my husband would stand up for me. But I couldn't. Because I'd already seen him choose comfort over courage a dozen times. "I don't know," I admitted. Mark nodded. "Then we build you a safety net." He explained how prenuptial agreements worked. Most people thought they were just about money, but they could be customized, specific, targeted. We could include clauses about third-party residency, about decision-making authority, about what happens if boundaries are violated. If any adult other than you and Ethan moves into your marital home without your explicit written consent, he forfeits any claim to the property. He also forfeits any equity stake in your company. No spousal support. No buyout. I stared at the draft he'd pulled up on his screen. The language was clean, precise, final. "Is that legal?" "Perfectly, as long as both parties sign willingly and have access to independent legal counsel, which he will. I'll make sure of it." We also put the house into a trust, my name only, protected, separate. Even if we got married, even if we lived there together, the house would never be marital property. It would always be mine. When we finished, Mark printed everything and placed it in a red folder. He wrote Phase 2 on the tab. "Phase 2?" I asked. "Phase 1 is prevention. You set boundaries. You communicate clearly. You give him every opportunity to choose you. Phase 2 is protection. If he doesn't choose you, you've already chosen yourself." I signed the documents. My hand didn't shake. When I walked out of his office that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. Not over Ethan, not over his family, but over my own future. 2 weeks later, I presented the prenup to Ethan. We were sitting in my apartment, takeout containers on the coffee table. He read through it quickly, too quickly, the way you skim terms and conditions before clicking agree. "This is pretty standard, right?" he asked. "It protects both of us," I said, which wasn't a lie. It just protected me more. He signed. His signature looked confident, unbothered. He didn't ask questions about the third-party residency clause. He didn't wonder why the house would be in my name only. He trusted me. Or maybe he just didn't think it mattered. Mark filed everything the next day. The prenup, the trust documents, the carefully worded clauses that would activate the moment his mother tried to move in. I saved copies in 3 different places. Cloud storage, a safety deposit box, a folder on my attorney's server. My revenge wasn't about ruining Ethan. It was about giving my future self an exit door. I thought about that a lot in the weeks before the wedding. Was I wrong? Was I being calculating? Cold? The internet said I was smart. My therapist said I was protecting myself. My mother said she wished she'd done the same thing before her first marriage. But late at night, I wondered. If he knew about the clause, would he change? Would he finally set boundaries? Or would he just resent me for not blindly trusting him? I never got to find out, because on our wedding day, his mother answered that question for both of us. The morning of my wedding felt like moving through honey. Everything was slow and bright and sticky sweet. My bridesmaids filled the hotel suite with laughter and champagne. Someone ordered room service, eggs Benedict, fresh berries, mimosas. I didn't drink because I wanted to remember every moment. My phone buzzed constantly. Investors emailing about quarterly projections. I ignored them. Today wasn't about my company or my career. Today was supposed to be about love. My mother-in-law arrived unannounced around 11. She knocked twice and walked in before anyone could answer. She wore the navy sequined gown we'd approved weeks earlier. Her hair was done, makeup perfect. She looked like she was ready for her own celebration. "Let me see you," she said, pulling me away from my maid of honor. She adjusted my veil, tugged at the sleeves of my gown, stepped back and smiled. "You're officially part of our family now. No backing out." She said it like a joke, like something lighthearted you'd say to a nervous bride. But there was weight behind it. A claim. A declaration. I smiled and nodded and excused myself to fix my lipstick in the bathroom. Small violations piled up throughout the morning. She rearranged the seating chart to put herself at the head table. She inserted herself into the bridal party photos. She told the photographer she wanted just family shots that somehow included everyone except my mother. I let it go, over and over, because I was getting married, because I wanted to believe that these were just quirks, just enthusiasm, just a mother-in-law who loved her son. The ceremony was beautiful. Ethan cried when I walked down the aisle. I cried when he said his vows. For 20 perfect minutes, I believed we'd figure everything out. That love would be enough. The reception started at 5. Golden hour light poured through the ballroom windows. Our first dance was to a song we'd picked together. Guests toasted us. My college parlor mate made everyone laugh with stories about our terrible apartment sophomore year. Ethan's best man roasted him gently. Everything felt exactly right. Then the DJ handed my mother-in-law the microphone. I was standing near the dessert table. Lemon cake, 3 tiers, raspberry filling. I watched her take the mic like she'd planned this moment, like it was part of the program. "Since you have just lost your job, you'll be moving in with my son. He'll take care of you now." The ballroom went silent, then the laughter started. Nervous at first, then louder. Phones came out. Someone shouted, "Aw, family forever." Someone else said, "That's so sweet." But it wasn't sweet. It was a test. And I knew, standing there in my wedding gown with cake on a plate I'd never eat, that Ethan was about to fail. I looked at him, my husband of 3 hours. He stood frozen near the bar, his face pale except for 2 pink spots on his cheeks. Our eyes met. I waited. I waited for him to walk over and gently take the microphone, to say, "Mom, we'll talk about this later," to protect the boundary I'd built into our prenup 6 months ago. He looked away. He stared at his shoes. He lifted his beer and took a drink. In that moment, I felt the claws ignite. The one buried in the red folder back in Atlanta. The one that said, if any third adult tries to move into our marital home without my written consent, Ethan forfeits everything. The house, the company, the future. I smiled. I kissed my roommate on the cheek. I told her I needed air. Then I walked out of my own reception with my train, dragging behind me like a white flag I refused to wave. If he let her move in, he'd be moving out. He just didn't know it yet. Our hotel suite smelled like room service and regret. Half-eaten fries sat on the table next to wilted flowers. The TV played a rom-com on mute. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing his tuxedo. I stood by the window in my wedding gown, watching the city lights blur together. I'd changed out of my heels. My feet ached. My head ached. Everything ached. "Olivia, can we please just talk about this tomorrow?" That was his answer. Delay, deflect, avoid. the same pattern he'd followed for months, but tonight I was done waiting. I pulled the red folder from my suitcase, the one Mark had given me 6 months ago, the one labeled Phase 2. I placed it on the table between the fries and the flowers. Then I sat down across from my husband of 6 hours and opened it. "Do you remember signing this?" I asked. He glanced at the prenup. "Of course, we both signed it." "Did you read it?" His face shifted. Defensive. "I trusted you." Page 7, Section 4, Third-Party Residency Clause. I watched him read. His eyes moved slowly across the text. Then they widened. He looked up at me. "This says if anyone moves in without your written consent, I lose the house and any claim to your company." "That's correct." "Olivia, what the hell? When were you going to tell me about this?" I kept my voice calm. Documentary-level calm. "I'm telling you now. Your mother just announced to 200 people that she's moving in with us. That activates the clause. If she moves into our home, you forfeit your rights to the property and my business. No spousal support, no buyout, nothing." Ethan stood up, paced, ran his hands through his hair. "You've been planning this? You've been sitting on this for 6 months?" "I've been protecting myself for 6 months." "From what? From me?" "From this exact moment." He stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe he'd never really known me at all. Maybe he'd just known the version of me that smiled through dinners and let things go and pretended his family's behavior was normal. "You ambushed me," he said. "Your mother ambushed us. I gave you an out. All you had to do was say something, anything." "We'll talk about this later, Mom." "That's not the plan." "But you said nothing." "Because I was embarrassed. Because everyone was watching." "Exactly. You were more worried about embarrassing your mother than protecting your wife." The word wife hung in the air between us. Heavy. New. Fragile. Ethan sat back down. He put his head in his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Broken. "I don't know how to say no to her. I've never known how. She raised me alone after my dad left. She sacrificed everything. And every time I try to set a boundary, I feel like the worst son in the world." There it was, the truth we'd been dancing around for months. Ethan wasn't a villain. He wasn't cruel or selfish. He was trapped, stuck between guilt and growth, between his mother's needs and his wife's sanity. I felt something soften in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. "I'm not asking you to abandon her," I said. "I'm asking you to choose me, to put our marriage first, to tell her she can't live with us." "And if I can't?" "Then I'll have the front desk split the bill and call you an Uber to your mother's." He looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time since we'd met. "You'd really do it? You'd really end this on our wedding night?" I'd really protect myself on our wedding night. We sat in silence. The city hummed outside our window. The TV played its silent rom-com. Somewhere in the building, other newlyweds were probably toasting their future. We were negotiating ours. Finally, Ethan spoke. "What do you want me to do?" I slid a piece of hotel stationery across the table. I'd already written it out. A simple agreement. A promise. "Sign this. It says you'll set clear boundaries with your mother. That will go to couples therapy. That no one moves into our home without both of us agreeing. If you can't sign it, I understand. But I need you to know what you're choosing." He picked up the pen. His hand shook. He stared at the paper for a long time. Then he signed his name. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was a beginning. 3 weeks after the wedding, Ethan and I sat in our South Park house, surrounded by moving boxes. The Craftsman with the blue door and the hardwood floors that creaked just right. The house I'd protected with paperwork and planning and a lawyer in Atlanta. Couples therapy appointment cards lined the refrigerator. Tuesdays at 6. We'd only been twice, but Ethan was trying. Really trying. He'd started reading books about boundaries and family dynamics. He joined an online support group for adult children of divorced parents. Small steps, but steps. My mother-in-law called on a Thursday afternoon. I was unpacking kitchen boxes, wine glasses, coffee mugs, the ordinary things that make a house, a home. Ethan answered on speakerphone. Hey, Mom. Hi, honey. I was thinking I might come stay with you two for a few weeks while I look for my own place. I froze. Here it was again. The same request in different packaging. The same assumption that our home was her backup plan. Ethan looked at me. I didn't nod. I didn't shake my head. I just waited. This was his test, his moment to choose. He took a breath. Mom, I love you. But Olivia and I talked about this. We're not having anyone move in. That's our boundary. Silence on the other end. Then, what do you mean, not having anyone? I'm your mother. I know, and I want to help you find an apartment. I'll help with the deposit. I'll help you move. But you're not living with us. His voice shook, but it didn't break. He said the words I'd needed him to say 6 months ago. Better late than never. His mother hung up without saying goodbye. Ethan stared at his phone. I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. He leaned into me. We stood there in our kitchen, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the beginning of something different. A week later, we hosted a small housewarming, just close friends, pizza and beer instead of catered appetizers. Someone jokingly grabbed a spatula and pretended it was a microphone. To a home with just 2 names on the lease, they toasted. Everyone laughed. But this time, the laughter felt different. Lighter. Like something shared instead of something survived. I kept phase 2 in place, the prenup, the trust, the clause that protects my house and my company. Not because I don't trust Ethan, but because I finally trust myself. I know what I'm worth. I know what I won't tolerate. And I know that love without respect doesn't get a spare room in my life. Some people will say I was calculating, that I manipulated my husband with legal paperwork and ultimatums. Others will say I was smart, that I protected myself from becoming another cautionary tale in the endless cycle of toxic family stories. Maybe they're both right. At my wedding, my husband stayed silent when his mother tried to move into our life. In our home, he finally learned to speak up, not because I forced him, but because I showed him what it costs to stay silent. If you believe marriage should never mean sacrificing your sanity for someone else's guilt, hit subscribe and tell me. Would you have signed phase 2, or would you have trusted love to be enough?